What makes you, you? Is it the city you grew up in? Is it the family you were born into? Or the one you made? The advent of modernity has forced into question the very fabrics that bind society to traditional religious or philosophical assumptions. A spiritual quest to discover the very notion of the self in the face of a constantly changing world. Exploring themes of gentrification, alienation, and identity, Joe Talbot's 2019 film The Last Black Man in San Francisco is a fictionalized account of its lead Jimmy Fails' upbringing. He is joined by playwright Mont and a motley array of characters representative of the city's fragmented identity. Jimmy, however, knows who he is and where he's going, finding direction and identity in an old Victorian home he proudly proclaims was built by his grandfather. He maintains it any way he can to keep that connection alive, much to the annoyance of the current occupants. The house clouds his perspective on the world. He is a prisoner to the mythic creation surrounding it. So when the house is to be left vacant for many years, he and Mont decide to reclaim a piece of the city they both love. The film showcases how modernity questions the very legitimacy of the present, forcing individuals to feel a sense of nostalgic value towards objects and places, till they become only external, fragmented representations of the self. Overall, this materialistic need of modernity to consistently generate new things, new information, never considering that this could be more destructive than good, could be argued to be entirely alienating. Its largest effect being one of nihilistic separation and drifting apart of the very ideas of identity and the self. Within the rapidly changing environments, many of these characters search for meaning, for legitimacy by clinging to whatever they can, to social circles, to stories, to objects. They build a nostalgic value around representations of these ideals used to fill the void of religion or community created by modernity. For within this state, the very act of consciousness is argued to exist solely to act towards and perpetuate an identity or ideal version of this sense of self. For Mont, his ideal is found in his art, in his writing. He sees everything through his filter till he is completely alienated from his surroundings. He becomes a passive viewer, only connected to the world through Jimmy and his myth, unable to match a society which matches societal progress to artificial sincerity. But for Jimmy, this ideal is the house, what it represents. The sense of ownership and pride he feels in it. It becomes an external reflection of his own desire for belonging, filling a spiritual void for meaning or a greater goal to strive towards. Mirroring him is Kofi, who shares a similar upbringing yet lacks any kind of passion or history to cling to. Instead, he finds identity in a gang, which he so desperately wants to be worthy of that he'd eventually die for it.
The world put him in a box. He never pushed beyond it.
When Jimmy and Mont claim the house, it is a moment of childlike glee, a short fleeting escape from the reality that must eventually end. So when the truth comes out,
your grandpa didn't build this house! He didn't build it, Jimmy!
It brings Jimmy's whole identity crashing down. He is now like Kofi, left adrift with nothing to cling to, no sense of the legitimacy in his identity or connection to the city that he held so dearly. However, this nihilistic rattling of modernity upon Jimmy's sense of self forces him to question his own existence in the present, in the now.
Self-taught historian. Carpenter. Gentle, loving man. A true survivor. Jimmy, how many places have you lived? And if they kicked you out tomorrow, you would still be all those things!
To move beyond the house, beyond the city, beyond the lies he tells himself.
You exist beyond these walls. You extend beyond your forefathers. You're not this house. Jimmy, you are not these walls, not this floors, you're not this ceiling. It's time you know. What are you doing?
If Jimmy is to grow and discover who he truly is, he must choose to accept the truth, despite how painful it would be. To deny it would be to become like his father, fragmented and spiteful, possessed by a delusion. Yet for Jimmy to do this and remain in the city, it isn't possible. So he leaves. He leaves to discover who he is apart from the trappings of modernity. He leaves behind the city. He leaves behind his family. He leaves behind Mont. Despite the pain, it is only through his act of separation, of philosophical death, that Jimmy can find true meaning of the self and value in existence. It provides him a new direction. He is no longer adrift. He is instead guiding his life by his own will. The Last Black Man in San Francisco provides a personal exploration of the effects of modernity upon identity itself. It's one where the past, places, and people become inconsistent sources of legitimacy for justifying the very notions and actions of the self beyond their changing surroundings. But this is a distraction, a momentary, fleeting distraction from what really matters. The real conveyed effect of modernity upon the self is not simply one of nihilistic despair, but a challenge to rediscover meaning not in ideas or in objects, but in defining what we are independent from these things. It's who you decide to be in the here and the now. The only self that matters is a self that can act in the present, independently of its past. An idea Jimmy is now free to explore.